Thank you everyone again for joining us here today for today's 5010 Inspections and Airport Management webinar, which is part of the Winter Technical Webinar Series. See if I can advance my slides here. Just a little bit of information about AirTAP for those unaware. AirTAP helps Minnesota's public and private sector airport professionals improve the safety, quality, and efficiency of airport operations and increase the use of air navigation materials, practices, and technology. Our training and event opportunities include the annual Minnesota Airports Conference, annual webinar series, and an annual wildlife hazard control workshop. And then we also have electronic and print newsletters covering airport management and related topics relevant to all Minnesota airports, large and small. As I mentioned, this is part of the Winter Technical Webinar Series. We have the, excuse me, final webinar in the series coming up on April 8th. And we also have recordings available currently on the website from the previous webinars that we had earlier this spring. And then just drawing your attention to our other webinar series, the Advanced Air Mobility webinar series has a webinar upcoming this Thursday. I keep saying webinar, I don't know how many times, at 9 o'clock. On Thursday, go ahead and register, is covering AM enabling infrastructure. And then just a quick plug for upcoming events. We do have the April 23rd to 25th Airports Conference occurring in Mankato. We're still on, it's still going. Please register. Yes, Kim has the postcard there. And we also have registration open for the May 7th Wildlife Hazard Control Workshop. Just a quick blurb about this year's conference. It features an open house event at the Mankato Airport, as well as breakout sessions targeting technical, administrative, and airport management content. Your feedback is valuable to helping us understand your needs and your clients' needs. We invite you to take this brief survey. It will appear in your browser after the webinar concludes. We just welcome your feedback and always want to know what the needs are and what topics we should be covering next. So we appreciate everybody who just takes a minute or two to fill this out. And then some quick housekeeping. We are utilizing the chat today. So you are welcome to input your questions and comments as we go along in the chat. And then Kim will stop and address things as we go along here. And then if there's time at the end, we can have a longer discussion. And with that, I am excited to hand things off to Kim Kenville. I don't know if any introduction is necessary because it sounds like Kim knows half of you on here, so or more than half probably. But we are excited for Kim to join us for today's webinar in advance of her joining us again for this year's Minnesota Airports Conference, where she has 3 sessions specifically going to target airport management content. So Kim, we're excited to have you here. I'll have you take it away.
Thanks, Natalie. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with all of you guys today. It's always interesting to look at my picture from like 6 years ago and go, oh, I wish I was still that person, right? But it's exciting to be here. Let me get my slides up. All right, are you seeing that, Natalie?
Yes.
Perfect. So as Natalie said, I'm Kim Kenville, and I think I know a few of you. I looked at the roster yesterday and I thought, I think I've had a few in class, and I think I've worked with a few of you professionally. So I appreciate you guys joining. Full disclaimer, I don't run out and do 5010 inspections every week. I'm lucky enough to be chair of the North Dakota Aeronautics Commission, and I have 2 amazing planners that work for our staff, Adam and Dylan, and they do that on behalf of the state of North Dakota. So I just want to say that I think you're extremely lucky that you have AirTAP with the U of M, because, it's a great opportunity to get education and learning. And with Minnesota Aeronautics, we don't do it the same way in North Dakota. We do it a little bit differently. So again, I'm just really thrilled to be here, and we'll get headed on our way. So what we're going to talk about today is safe, secure, and efficient airports. That's our edict from the Federal Aviation Administration, and likely your edict from the state, right? So you're running a public use airport that the public is trusting that it's going to be safe, it's going to be secure, and it's going to be efficient. And we're going to talk about those three words a little bit more in detail, but that's really kind of, I would get our guiding light or our mission for running an airport. So we're going to have federal requirements, we're going to have some state requirements. And so it's important that you understand the difference between the two and what's expected, basically if you take their free money. So as we know, when you get money, it's never really for free. There's always strings attached. And so this is no different in this case with your federal or state requirements. The other thing that we have to always remember is that we're there for the pilot or the user, right? If we don't have pilots and we don't have passengers, or we don't have general aviation or cargo or air ambulance or aerial application, there's really no reason for us to be in business. And if we don't take good care of our asset, then they might quit coming. And I would say our other big thing that all of us have to embrace on a daily basis is access. We have to keep making sure that people have access to use our asset and our facility, because we can all tell in the last 20 to 30 years, we've done nothing but close off access for people. We've put up fences, we've locked gates, we've locked doors. And, we have to do that, but we also have to figure out how we let the public access us, because I can tell you, other than students at the University of North Dakota and other flight programs, the numbers are down that people are engaging in aviation. It's expensive. And if we don't make it accessible, then people are going to quit coming. And then it's going to be a really hard sell with our communities. So I can tell you in reading current events, and I'm sure all of you do too, that there's airports that are slated to be closed. The community doesn't see value. It's expensive. And so we have to keep doing our best to make sure the pilots and the users and the young people can get out and really experience what we all love is aviation. So we're going to talk a little bit about inspections and documentation, which the basic genesis for this is the 5010 requirements. And so you might be thinking 5010, what's the important about a 5010? Forms at the federal government, just like we're all filling out tax forms this season, they're just numbers, right? But our numbers don't really change, whether it's regulations, whether it's forms. So you kind of just get to know the numbers when we talk about this. And really our goal is compliance, right? So we want to be in good compliance or good standing with our federal partners and our state partners, and so that we can continue to enjoy the fruits of the airport. So part of that is safe, secure, and efficient operations. So we talked about that. So what does safe mean? I always talk about safe, secure, and efficient. So I thought, I'm going to look it up and I'll post it. So, to be safe, secure from liability, to harm, injury, danger, or risk. So a safe place. That's really what we want the airport to do. And you can see as they kind of roll through these 5 different parts of this definition, it's all back to safe, dependable, no risk. So really looking at your hazards is what that's telling me, and making sure that you can do your very best to reduce the hazards that may be in and around your airport. And I think the hardest thing for any of us to look at is to look at ourselves every single day, right? We see the same thing day after day after day after day. It doesn't change. And then somebody else comes along and says, hey, when did that get built? Or when did they change that road? Or when did they do this construction? And you're like, whoa, something did change. So being vigilant, looking for the hazards is important. So secure, this is, again, free from, I love this, free from or not exposed to danger, harm, or safe. So secure actually uses the word safe in its own definition. Okay, so again, these two words pretty synonymous. I think when we think security, we think of some sort of danger or offense or locked doors, dependable, firm, not liable to fail, yield, become displaced. So really affording safety. And you look at this, and again, we almost have the word safe and another 4 of these definitions under the word secure. So really kind of honing in on that whole safety. And then I always really get troubled with efficiency. Okay, so is efficient mean, for me, efficient means fast, because I'm a type A personality. I like to get it done. I like to have success and I want it to be quick. But other people, efficient is maybe it's not quick, but maybe it's cost effective, right? So I'm doing this in a very cost effective manner and I'm being efficient with my resources. So performing or functioning in the best possible manner with the least waste of time and effort, having and using requisite knowledge, skill in the industry, being economical, producing an effect as a cause, utilizing particular commodity or product with the least waste of resources. So that really rings home to me, right? So let's try to operate this airport as efficiently as possible, meaning let's not waste a lot of money, let's not waste a lot of effort and time, but let's make sure that it's safe and secure. So again, the FAA throws those 3 words at us pretty heavily to make sure that we're doing that as an airport proprietor. So they throw out safe, secure, and efficient, but then they also tell us that we have to follow grant assurances. So one of our most favorite things to do in the airport is follow all the rules, right? And we think that it's just regs. So if you're from the pilot side of the house, you know a lot of different regs under Part 61, Part 91. If you're, an air carrier airport, you're Part 139, which is the safety of primarily the airfield. And then this whole thing called grant assurances comes into play. So not only are we following the federal aviation regulations, FARs or CFRs, I've noticed they've kind of pushed them too. But now in the event that we take money, right, we dip our hand into the golden bag of money at the trust fund, we also then a whole set of regulations come with that are called grant assurances. So you're assuring the federal government by taking their money, you're going to follow the rules. So grant assurance number 19, and not that you have to memorize number 19, but these are all numbered as well on the FAA website, and they don't really change. They might get updated a little bit, but by and large, they just keep adding more. And I think we're up to number 37 last time I checked. And so 19 is going to stay 19. So that's how it's referred. So this talks about operating and maintaining an airport. So the airport and facilities which are necessary to serve the aeronautical users of the airport other than facilities owned or controlled by the United States, that would be federal, shall be operated at all times in a safe and serviceable. So now we throw serviceable in. So we keep the safety and serviceable. So again, this is to me a little bit more legal ease, but making sure that the users can get in and out of the airport and it's maintained properly. In accordance with minimum standards is the next blue line. Now here's an interesting piece, and I know this webinar is not about minimum standards, but I love minimum standards, and I think every airport should have minimum standards because then we have this operating foundation. At a minimum, everyone's going to do X. You can do more, but you shouldn't do less because we have this minimum standard in place. You know, when you take an FAA written exam, you have to have a 70. That's the minimum standard, right? So it says right here, and you should be in accordance with your minimum standards, but no other place does the FAA really say, like, you have to write them, but they're kind of inferring at this point in grant assurance number 19 that it's a really good idea. Then the next yellow piece says, you will suitably operate and maintain the airport and all facilities. So this is a couple of times now that we're saying safe, serviceable, suitably operate. I don't know that we have a direct definition of suitable out there from the FAA, like you know it when you see it, or if somebody tells on you that it's not suitable, then you're going to find out that you're not. But again, I think the safe, serviceable, suitable, maintaining your airport. And then the next little piece in blue, the sponsor will have effective arrangements for 1, operating the airport's aeronautical facilities, 2, promptly marking and lighting hazards resulting from airport conditions, including temporary conditions, and 3, promptly notifying pilots of any condition affecting the aeronautical use, which is really saying that you're issuing a NOTAM. And I know that Natalie said there's a webinar listed on NOTAMs. So here's where we really find the meat and potatoes of why we have to do our 5010 inspections, and it's required of us. It's required of us to run a safe, efficient, secure, serviceable, suitable. They throw a lot of different words at us, but basically operating a safe atmosphere. And this is, again, right from the grant assurances number 19. So again, the grant assurances is a promise. The sponsor, which is the owner of the airport. So in the United States, that's going to typically be a city, a county, an airport authority. So if your state, like Minnesota, has legislation at the state level that recognizes an airport authority, so those are available as a sponsor or owner of the airport, they all have to promise the federal government when they take an award or a grant of money that they're going to follow the rules. This orange link, and the slides should be available. I sent them to Natalie. This orange link will take you to all the grant assurances. And, it's kind of one of those documents, if you can't fall asleep at night and you don't have a Netflix series to watch anymore, it'd be a good sleepy time reading to try to get through the grant assurances. And there's a lot of laws and it's kind of heavy reading in the beginning, but then it starts through the grant assurances, and it's really good just to kind of brush up, because all of a sudden they might slip one in at the end. So the interesting thing about grant assurances is the government and the FAA really does not have to do a notice of proposed rulemaking. So they can just add a grant assurance overnight, like when we're sleeping, like our parents used to do, just change the rules. We wake up and there's new rules in the morning because we're running under a household dictatorship. This is the same kind of thing. So the FAA can add these when needed. And I think the last one is competitive access for air carrier airports and large and medium hubs, but new things show up all the time. So if you're an airport that's part of the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, or we like to call NIPIAS, which is a terrible acronym, you're considered federally obligated, which means you're obligated to follow these rules because you took the free money. And you might say, well, how long do I have to do this, right? 20 years, right? So it says, I think, right in number 3 of the grant assurances, 20 years from the day you take money. Well, if you're taking an entitlement grant every single year, then the 20 years starts over every single year. We're also seeing some really interesting, I think we're going to see it through the court system in Boulder, Colorado. Boulder, Colorado is contemplating closing their airport because they'd like to turn it into affordable housing tracts because they just don't really think they need it, right? And so they want to quit taking grant money, but we're very concerned with the land. So here's where the FAA is stepping in and saying, well, land might be forever, right? So we're not really sure how we look at land. But if if you did a taxiway or you bought a snow plow, that's 20 years, but we think land is forever. I think that's going to make it to the court system, quite honestly, because I'm not sure you can bound somebody forever, right? They bought the land maybe in 1947 and built an airport. And so now we have to follow grant assurances for the rest of our natural life. So again, I think you're going to see that one run through the court system. So I think we'll all be kind of on the edge of our seat. But downtown Cleveland Lakefront Airport is looking at closing. I think we all are aware of Santa Monica, California has not taken grant dollars since 2003. So they're looking at probably, I would guess, I think they've now said 2028 as a close. So again, it's very real because people are not engaging in aviation and there's a lot of people that don't see value to airports. So kind of have to be on guard about that. So what are the user expectations? So these are our pilots, right? People, flying air ambulance, or people flying aerial applications, or people, sightseeing or banner towing, or just using the airport for their own personal use or corporate use, right? So, as we know, down in the Twin Cities, we've got a lot of corporate activity at our reliever airports, and I know we've got some reliever crew on today. And so then you've got corporate traffic, right? You've got a lot of corporations that are housing very expensive aircraft and they want to be in and out and they want just as little fray as possible. And so the pilot in command of the aircraft is responsible for the final authority to operate that aircraft. But they need information, right? They need to go to a source they can trust. They need to know what the atmosphere is. They need to know that the airport is operating in a safe, secure, and efficient manner, and they're following their minimum standards. They need to know that the greatest asset at the airport is in safe operating order. And that's on us, the airport managers and the sponsors of those airports. They have to be able to trust the system. That's why we have the greatest system, right? And we've been in the news a ton, and we have lots of citizen journalists these days, but by and large, we know that we're a safe operating atmosphere. There's things that happen to air as human, but we live in a very safe situation because we have all this layers of regulations. And so for the pilots who are our user, we need to make sure that we're safe, secure, and efficient. So what is our most important asset? I would say it's your runways, right? This is how we're going to get to and from different places with our pilots. So really maintaining and paying close attention to our runways, our taxiways, our ramp areas. You know, there's lots of terms, whether it's the air side, the AOA, the movement area, but by and large, it's our airfield, and making sure that it's as safe as possible for people to utilize. So the 50-10, another word salad slide, and I just highlighted a few areas. So this is right from the FAA website. So the first one, right in line 3, is this data is mandatory, right? So not only did we have a grant assurance telling us we need to be safe, we have this regulatory language that says this data is mandatory that we report this. So down in the middle, it says the airport master record of 5010 data is collected under the Airport Data and Information Program on an as needed basis. Oh, well, there's some wiggle room, right? As needed. But the goal is to obtain a yearly update. So is it really as needed, right? So maybe you can report more than yearly, right? If you've got a change in your airfield, you've done some construction, you've changed something that you need to alert the users of. A yearly update of all airports on record with the FAA, either through physical inspection, self-reporting by airport management, or a mail solicitation. So yeah, still through snail mail. Data from the private use airports is usually every 3 years. I'm not sure if we have any private use airports on the webinar today, but if you're open to the public but privately owned, we still want you to report because people are going to be using that airport, and we need to know that it's safe and serviceable, right? So here's where it says that we have to do this activity. So this blue link on top is live. It'll take you right to the airport master record. You can click on the 5010-1 and jump into this electronically generated document. So kudos to the FAA because it is electronic, right? So it's not as hard to update as when we were filling out paper forms and we'd have to send them in and then they would have to get updated. So really you can do this fairly quickly without you know, a lot of undue delay, because we want to make sure that we get the information into the hands of our pilot user group as quickly as we can, especially if there's changing conditions, right? It's up to the PIC. They always have the power of the parking brake to be able to stop the flight, but if they didn't get good, solid, reliable information, how do they know, right? And so we don't want to have a mishap occur because we live in a litigative society, right? And so if we have something that's not documented that we knew was happening, then that's on us. And we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So where does this information go? So I'm sure a lot of you, especially if you're pilots, you've seen the Green Book. And when I did my flight training, it was called the Airport Facility Directory, which I think is a fabulous name for the Green Book because that's what it is, an airport facility directory. But a number of years ago, the FAA changed it to Chart Supplement. So the interesting thing is the books have what's called an effective date. So that means the information is live on that date, and then it goes to a certain day, right? So it's usually about a 3-month time period. This one is effective from 24th March 22 to the 19th of May. So they reprint every so often. So if you've got a change, you want to get into that next reprinting of the document. It's up to the pilot to make sure that they have the most accurate and up-to-date chart supplement, which again is available online now, but still is printed, I think, in the green books that we see. But that's why the FAA needs lead time, because it has to get into print. So if you've done things with navigational aids or runways or changing the orientation, those happen on certain days of the months because they need to get into the next publication. Now that we're electronic, a little bit more flexibility, but still it's got to get in the publication lineup. What I think pilots most often use is airnav.com, and then you click on the airport tab and you type in the 3-letter identifier. So down on the bottom, this is Bemidji, Minnesota. This is basically a regurgitation of the 5010 form, and I just grabbed as much as would fit in my screen grab here. But this is all the information that a pilot is going to look at. So is there a segmented circle? No. Is the wind indicator, it's lighted, right? This gives them the information they need. What kind of lights, what kind of beacon? A huge one is ARF index, right? So aircraft rescue and firefighting. So I know if I'm flight planning and I have a problem that Bemidji is going to have fire service. right? So maybe I want to plan to go into that airport or something like that. Airline operations, and then it goes on and on. It lists all the runways, all the taxiways, all the aprons. It lists the FBOs, what kind of fuel and maintenance is available. So that is really important inventory to supply to the pilots, right? So that they know what they're going into. I think another big one that we're all going to be faced with is this change to unleaded aviation fuel. So I've sat on a couple avgas research panels, and it's frustrating because whether I think we're all learning a lot about fuel that we never really wanted to learn about, right? So the FAA does not approve fuel. Okay. Everybody thinks that the FAA approves fuel. They don't approve fuel. In fact, nobody approves fuel. So what happens is we have a fuel vendor and they may take it to the ASTM, the American Society of Testing Materials, which is not a government agency. And they will test the fuel that it meets specification of what you said it is in it. And then we rely on the airplane manufacturers and the engine manufacturers to say which fuel can go in their airplanes. And then the FAA does a production certificate on that type of aircraft. But we need the fuel manufacturers and the engine manufacturers to be on the same wavelength, if you will, to make sure we can use that fuel. So us as airports, we're faced with, do we mandate some sort of fuel? What kind of fuel should be available? Do we have different types of fuel available? And the pilot community needs to know what you're offering. And this is where you tell them through the 5010 report that gets printed either in the lovely green book, or AirNav takes all that information really nicely and puts it out there for airports or for pilots. So how are you going to go about doing this whole 5010? Well, it's all about inventory and checklists. So this blue graphic is actually from ACRP guidebook number 16. And some of you, especially from Minnesota, might recognize this book. So I'm a big proponent of ACRP, which is the Airport Cooperative Research Program, which is an absolute mouthful. But this is a group from the National Academies of Sciences, and they do free research. So I'm sorry, consultants, if you're an airport, go out and get as much free reference materials you can, because really great consultants have done it and they've been paid for by the FAA. So the FAA gives $15 million a year through a congressional mandate to the National Academies, which was actually started by President Lincoln to get unbiased research for the federal government. And I think we're up to like 260 different guidebooks right now. And there's information on everything. But my favorite, and I use as a textbook in my class, is the guidebook for managing small airports. And this is actually report 16, but it's the second edition. We had an update. The first edition was actually done by a team from AirTAP, led by Jim Grothus, if any of you remember him, and Sean Germolis, Dave Beaver, and a group out of Minnesota. So they did the first one, and now it's been updated by Hansen, which is a consultant in the Midwest. You can download this for free. So if you click on that link, you hit the download free PDF. If you want to buy it, it's super expensive. I have it right here. Pretty big book. And there's a website compendium which has checklists and guides and things like that, kind of one-pagers. But this checklist on the left is from this guidebook. So if you're doing an inspection, what are you looking for? All of these different things, right? You want to make, some of them you may not have, you may have more than some, right? And so really looking at this list and looking at your airport on a daily basis. So when you download this free document, you can download it as a guest, or you can actually make an account. They won't send you spam email. You can sign up to get like titles if you want to, but free consulting. And if you're new to the airport industry and maybe you're working at the city and now whammo, you've got the golf course and the airport in your portfolio, this is a fantastic guidebook that really kind of gets you up to speed with FAA vernacular and understanding kind of what your responsibility is. So get organized, right? Take inventory of your airfield. Look at your runways, your taxiways, your ramps, hangars, service roads, signs, marking, and lighting. Marking is paint. For those that are always like, what is marking? I don't know why they don't call it paint, but now there's stickers and stuff like that. Nav aids, which are navigational aids. And I would say the big thing with your nav aids is take inventory of what you have, who owns it, how you're going to get it fixed if it goes down, right? So there's a lot of different arrangements in this arena. So sometimes the state may own a nav aid, sometimes the airport may own it, like a VOR or an ILS. In North Dakota, we have it's not a navigational aid, but we have the AWAS and ASOS, the weather service, and weather reporting equipment, and the state has now taken some responsibility on fixing it because it's very expensive and the parts are hard to get. So on your nav aids and your kind of instrumentation, I would really dial that in and figure out who owns it, who needs to maintain it. I always say let the FAA own it and maintain it because then it's on them, but making sure that you know, right, on your airfield. Your safety areas, which are technically on both sides, of the runway and the taxiway, we usually call them grass areas, but safety areas, and then off the ends of each runway. Your fuel farm, right? So most of us are going to have a fuel farm inspection, not only from the FAA and your 5010 form, but you might have it from your state petroleum council. You might have it from any hazardous material. That's going to have the material data and all of that OSHA information attached to it. So the fuel farm actually kind of expands the safe and secure, if you will, your tanks and your system. So make checklists, right? So there's checklists as part of this document that I referred to on the previous page, but customize them for your airport. Get a high school or local college kid that can do web forms, and so you can maybe automate this a little bit and make notes, follow up on your maintenance items, and really I would say make some sort of matrix of here's the things I need repaired, here's the cost, here's the time. And when you're making notes, this is evidence of compliance, right? So if you have an inspection or something goes wrong and they're like, did you know about this? You're like, yeah, so we've been working on this systematically. But as you take notes and you follow up, keep those notes so you can have evidence that you're really trying to be in compliance with the regulations if you have an unsafe condition. And if you have an unsafe condition, obviously report it, right? So use the NOTAM system. Even though that's had a name change recently, it's still the same system. And we want to communicate to people using our facility of anything that's not normal. So we don't need a really long NOTAM, right? We need one that covers the basics and covers the things that are deemed unsafe at this time or needs to be fixed. So inspecting, this is again right from the previous book that I said. Most airports conduct inspections visually with one person in a vehicle and a paper inspection list. Airports utilize varied inspection patterns to conduct both day and night inspections. Operations personnel conduct self-inspections at most airports, and airports allow tenants to ride along. I love this, right? So when I worked in Detroit, we would always pick up air traffic control because they thought it was easy to drive the airfield. And once they were talking on the radio and driving the airfield, they realized it wasn't as easy as it looked. But, if you have tenants that are maybe, kind of always around and always present and kind of vigilant, bring them into the fold, right? Give them some responsibility doing it with you, especially if you're by yourself, right? And you're at a small airport. Two sets of eyes always better than one. So, bring them into the fold and get them closer. Training, initially training more than one person, so you have a backup in terms of looking at the different areas, inspecting, reporting discrepancies. I think a big one is the follow-up. So what's really big in our industry now is safety management systems. And although I believe we have always had a lot of safety, it's like a quilt that we haven't quite sewn together. We've got safety plans, security plans, ops plans, snow plans. We've got plans that have plans, right? And now we're in this fashion of sewing all of our pieces together. And so we have a cohesive management system. So don't get, wowed by the whole name of SMS, safety management systems. We hang the term management system on everything. You have information management systems, you have maintenance management systems, you have pavement management systems, safety management systems. All that is quality control. Okay, it's a feedback loop. So you do something, You watch and see how it works. If it's not working, you make a correction, you put the correction in real time, and then you do it the new way, right? We don't do it the old way every time because we've always been doing it that way. And that's really just a quality control, QA, QC check, right? And just managing our system and trying to find things that are unsafe before something bad happens, right? So when you're doing your inspections, I kind of like to divide it into two groups, inside the fence and outside the fence. And if you don't have a fence, pretend where your fence would be if you had one, right? So inside the fence, we're obviously keyed into the airfield and all of our pavements, right? So most states and most airports are part of PCI, which is Pavement Condition Index, right? So looking at your pavements on a routine basis, I think Minnesota's a third every year. So they're constantly every 3 years, your airport's getting inspected. North Dakota does all of them every 3 years. So it's just kind of a manner of how you do it. But looking at your pavement and be really keying into anything that's destroying your pavement, right? We can't always control Mother Nature and water and snow and what's underneath our pavement, our sub base, but getting your engineers involved and making sure that you're really keyed in to what's going on because it can go bad very quickly, right? Your lighting, making sure all of your lights are working, daytime, nighttime. Marking, we always find at the end of the snow season after a bunch of plowing that our markings don't look very good. You know, get them repainted. Signs, damage. So I don't know about you, but the wind, I watched the wind here in North Dakota last weekend. We were driving home from Minneapolis from spring break, but the wind was amazing. I was actually watching my backyard camera because it kept triggering. My grill cover actually flew from side to side in my backyard 3 different times, almost like Casper the Ghost. Uh, so we're going to be knocking down signs, we're going to be knocking down lights, and so really being cognizant of that. And of course, right now, I don't know about you guys, but we just got a dusting of snow here in Grand Forks yesterday. Of course we did. But our damage from our spring and fall, right? So the thaw and the runoff and what's happening, and really looking at your drainage, right? Outside the fence, our adjacent neighbors, what are they doing, right? Are they planting stuff? Are they putting up stuff? Ditches, roads, oh, trees, right? We've got a lot of trouble with trees because they grow. Your approach surfaces, and then if there's new construction in and around your area from your neighbors. So not naming names, but this is some of the pavement we've got out there. I'm not going to tell you which state it's from and where I grabbed it. Tipped over signs, right? So this could be a wind problem, this could be a base problem, but you know, the pilot's counting on being able to see what that sign says. And if it's doing a face plant, that's not really what we want. Here we've got some pavement disintegration. So that gravel is going to continue to be thawed and it's going to get picked up by a propeller or a jet engine and it's going to do damage. So really understanding, again, working tight with your engineering selection consultant to make sure that we're doing the best we can with our pavement. Again, looking at how our numbers have fared and our side stripes and our lights through the winter months is important. And our friend the trees, right? They're just going to keep growing. And so we have to really understand, and I'm a terrible judge of distance, terrible. And so I have to like park something there or get a grip of how tall it is. And, you know, we're in feet, we're in yards, we have all this different kind of measurement, but really understanding how your trees are affecting your airfield. So that leads me to say, how do you actually get to the runway, right? You get to the runway through the airspace. So here we have another regulation that's called FAR Part 77. And this is objects that affect navigable airspace. So down on the bottom graphic would be your runway. And you can see the green lines are the safety area. And then the trapezoidal shape off the end of the runway is going to be this approach to landing, approach and departure space. All of that needs to remain free and clear of obstructions to navigations. So we call those hazards, right? So the FAA requires all NIPIAS, so those are federally obligated airports, to reduce or remove any obstructions to navigation. You can do this through purchasing land, which is the most expensive option. You can do this through working with the landowners, which is the most difficult option, or use local planning and zoning. This is also probably a combination of difficult and expensive and time consuming, because this means you need to get with your city council, your county commissions, and make sure that they're zoning the land around your airport that's consistent with the airport. And this is a lot harder than it sounds for those of you that have been engaged in it, because most of our councils want to do economic development and they want to build stuff and they want to have jobs because that's their signal of success to their constituents. Our signal of success is don't let anyone build next to the airport that's going to choke off the use of the airport. So this is sometimes a pretty difficult situation to make sure that it happens. But certainly I would say if you have something in place that says if there's any construction within 5 nautical miles of the airport, that the airport needs to be brought into the conversation. So if there's building permits or there's conversation about that, make sure that you're brought into the conversation. And I think we would think if you're owned by the city or the county, that would be natural, but you'd be surprised, right? That it's not a natural conversation. So again, really making sure that those things are in place. And if you're an airport authority, you know that you're standing alone in the parking lot and you've either left your city or your county, and there could be good feelings or rough feelings about that. But so you want to make sure that those ties are still in place. So I have this italicized, I have it capitalized, I have it underlined, and I have it for a new color. So that's like 4 clicks on the mouse for me. Lots of work. So the protection of an airport airspace from encroachment is contingent upon the local government. The FAA provides guidance, but enforcement lies with the locals. So here we go, right? We live in America. We can own land and we can have quiet enjoyment and we can do what we want on our land, but the FAA is saying you got to make sure that you still have access to the runway. So they'll provide all the guidance we want to and all the documents to read, but the FAA is never going to come in and drop the hammer for you. You have to do that locally. That's why the relationship is so very important with your locals. Um, and this upper graphic is from a company called NV5 that I went to a presentation at NASEO and they shared their documents. But this is where we're using geospatial, GIS, and a lot of drone activity to actually map the area and survey and see what's going to come in. So all these red trees are an obstruction, right? They're a hazard to navigation. The orange and yellow are close and the green are okay. But we know the green trees are going to grow, right? And they're going to become yellows and become reds. And so that's why it's really vital to understand what's in your area. So part 77, objects that affect navigable airspace. There's an ACRP report that's all about that. Okay, and they give a lot of guidance on what you can do to try and help that situation. I have a video from the state of Washington, and I kind of bounding on time. So I would say watch this if you're kind of unsure of what all the imaginary surfaces mean. But what we're really looking at is this bottom graphic. We have our paved runway on the left, and we're trying to get that airplane on the far right down to the runway. So we have our runway safety area, which is 200 feet off the end of the runway where the dotted line starts. And then we have what's called our approach surface. So the approach surface is going to be different for each runway. So this is not standardized. It's either going to be 20 to 1, 34 to 1, or 50 to 1. And you remember geometry, rise over run. So really you need to understand what your airspace is at your airport because you need to protect it. And we're protecting it from traffic, from trees, from tall structures. And thankfully in North Dakota and Minnesota, we don't have a lot of terrain issues. We don't have any big mountains, even though there's a couple mild ski hills in Minnesota, but nothing really kind of mountainous. So we're lucky there. But we're really promising that airplane on the right-hand side that they can get to that runway with their eyes closed and not hit anything, right? So if it's instrument weather conditions, they're able to land. And again, this video is from the state of Washington. It's very old. So when you watch it, just keep that in mind. But it gives a good estimation of all of the airspaces. And I would love it if any consultant would update this video because it is old. This is the graphic that the FAA gives us on the left-hand side, which is, in my estimation, is absolutely horrible. It's, trying to throw 3 dimensions on a 1-dimensional piece of paper. So our runway is in the very center of this. And then all of these different surfaces go around this. So what I want to make clear is that each individual runway has its own airspace. And this football stadium, because I don't like teaching airspace because you don't really know where it's at, Adam Dillon harvested this from somewhere and gave it to me. So Adam, if you're on, thank you very much. I use this all the time. So the football stadium, we've got our runway right in the middle of the football stadium. Okay. And then we've got our safety area, right? So this is both sides of the runway, 250 feet each side of the runway, 200 feet off the end at the ground surface. So this is called the primary surface, and it is on the ground, right? So we need to make sure that that is free and clear of obstructions. Then we have what's called our transitional surface, where the airplane is transitioning from the ground to the air. Again, another really delicate part of flight, and we don't want anything built in this green area that would poke into the airspace. So if the airplane wasn't on the runway center line, it's not going to hit anything. Here we've got our horizontal surface, right? So when we see parallel runways like at Minneapolis or Chicago or Denver, this is the separation that they need to have, right? So each runway has its own stadium, if you will, to make sure that there's safe flight operations. And then here's, of course, our approach and departure. So this is that dotted line on the previous slide where our airplanes are going to come in and out of our runway. So if you think about this, this is how much free space I need around my runway. So if we start having the community build up around it and poke into any of these colors, you've just cut off access to your runway. And the FAA is going to be like, darn, you shouldn't have done that, but we're not coming to the rescue. Okay. This is another one that was courtesy of NV5 Geospatial. This doesn't have any sound, but it just shows you some of these surfaces. These are all red things poking into the airspace of the protected surface. This is going to be a heavy lift trying to get all of these trimmed, because think of all the landowners that you're going to have to talk to. So this is why it's really important to do these regular visual inspections of properties around your airport, because now I need to go talk to that landowner and see if I can remove some of this vegetation. And again, some of these green trees are going to be yellow and red in the coming years. So maybe it's a better bang for the buck to take them all out at once. So we've got our airport facility, and you can see that the impact of that, you've even got buildings built in that. So again, really important to be looking regularly at what's going on. So how do we get this all done? Get back to the basics. You know, we've all seen this graphic, failing to plan is planning to fail. So we have to have a plan of how we're going to do continuous inspections and ensuring that our 5010 information is up to date and recorded at least at a yearly basis, all the way going back to the regulations yearly, right? So I would form a small group at your airport. You know, maybe you bring your consultant in on a day that they're going to be there. So you got your consultant, you've got a board member, you've got your airport manager, maybe you have a tenant, but this is kind of your small little inspection group, and inventory the airport, and all of your surroundings. If you don't have an up-to-date airport layout plan or an up-to-date master plan, you know, these are good things to do in the interim to get those documents and keeping them live and flexible and up to date. So get your data, get your 5010 inspection form, look at all your data, and then go out and do comparisons, right? I would say, you know, get your list of things you need to do, your chores, right? Develop a matrix, just like we would with safety management systems. What is the most severe or biggest issue I need to fix to the least? Make a plan, because you're going to have to perform maintenance, but it's not going to be free, right? So you're going to have to put together this you know, list of what am I going to accomplish, and making sure that you're doing the things that are safety implicated first, right? Tackle those critical items, have monthly or quarterly meetings to track your progress. Again, with a plan, you're showing that you're trying to be in compliance. Don't wait till you have an inspection and you get a letter that says you're not in compliance, and you get a 10 or 12-page letter. That's overwhelming. It's better to be in compliance and taking little steps every month or every quarter, showing in good faith that you're making an effort to be in compliance, and keep it going, right? It's just like any group. We all belong to groups, and all of a sudden the group kind of falls off because nobody's really doing anything. Try to really keep this group going, and bringing in new people, right? Because the old volunteers get tired. So we're always on a recruiting mission. I call it evangelizing airport management, but you're always trying to evangelize a new person to get involved, a new hangar owner, get somebody new on the board to keep it all going. That kind of rounds out what I have to tell you. And I would say for resources, ACRP, this link will bring you to the ACRP publications. They come out in number order, but you can do, they have what's called collections. So like small airport management, they have a whole collection of documents that we've assembled that are kind of pertinent to that. You can either make an account or you can sign in as a guest. 2 clicks and the document's yours as a PDF. Some of my photos came from North Dakota, some came from Minnesota, some came from UND Aerospace, and various screen captures. And my last thing is I will tell you is I hope to see you at the Minnesota Airports Conference. I'll be down there. I have a couple sessions. And I will tell you that your guest speaker is phenomenal. So Kristen Scroggin is your, I think, guest speaker or keynote speaker. I've heard her. I follow her on LinkedIn. She does a phenomenal job talking about working across the generations. I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm finding some of my new little Zennial, Millennials, I generations in the classroom just different, right? Not that they're not going to succeed, but completely different. And so she does just a phenomenal job. And so I would hope that you go and learn something from her, but learn something at the Airports Conference. So I will take any questions that people have. I know a lot of you are seasoned veterans, and so you've been doing it longer than I have, but I appreciate you guys all coming today and hope to see you in Mankato.
Well, thank you, Kim. Great presentation. Thanks for the plug for the conference there, and for Kristen. We are very excited for her as well. We do have the chat open for everybody if you want to throw some comments or questions in there. We'll give it a minute to see if anything comes in.
Thanks, Allison. And we do have a few minutes, so I could go back and show that video. If anybody wants to see it.
Sure, we have a few minutes. I'm not seeing any questions. Thanks, Joseph. Yep, Angela would like us to show them.
Check this out. I'm going to show you how I afforded this car.
Okay, I'm still seeing your slides.
Pardon?
I'm still seeing your slides and not the video.
Okay, let me better?
Here we go.
You're gonna have to turn your volume up.
All general-use airports in the United States have surfaces which are established in relation to the airport and each runway end. They are referred to as imaginary surfaces because they define volumes of airspace which are invisible to the human eye. The size of each surface is based on the category of each runway according to the type of approach available or planned for that runway. For example, this represents a civil airport with only visual approaches. As such, the pilot must land the aircraft relying only on visual references, not his instruments or other electronic navigational aids. In this particular example, the runway is 4,014 feet in length and 50 feet in width. In order to help you understand the relationship that the imaginary surfaces have with each other, we will display each surface and describe it. We will exaggerate the vertical scale for more clarity. The first surface we'll discuss is the primary surface. The primary surface is the only surface which exists solely at ground level. It is centered on the runway is at the same elevation as the runway, and it extends 200 feet beyond each runway end. The primary surface is to be kept clear of all objects except those that are critical to the operation of aircraft, such as runway lights, signs, or electronic nav aids. The second surface is the approach surface. The approach surface is one of the most critical surfaces, since it is the one which an aircraft uses for approach to landing. The degree to which the approach surface slopes outward and upward depends on the type of approach for that runway end. The slope can be either a 20-to-1, a 34-to-1, or a 50-to-1. In this particular example, the approach surface slope is 20-to-1. That is, for each 20 feet outward, you go upward 1 foot. Airports such as SeaTac International have a 50-to-1 precision instrument approach. To the greatest extent possible, you want to have the approach surface clear of all objects so that nothing can impede the landing of an aircraft on final approach. The third surface is the transitional surface. The transitional surface extends outward and upward from the sides of an airport and its runway, or runways. The transitional surface starts at the edge of the primary surface and always rises at a standard slope of 7-to-1. The fourth surface is the horizontal surface. This flat surface rests 150 feet above the airport's elevation. Its shape is determined by swinging arcs from the center of the end of the primary surface for each runway end. In this case, the radius used is 5,000 feet. The fifth surface is the conical surface. The conical surface starts at the edge of the horizontal surface and extends outward and upward at a standard 20-to-1 slope for a horizontal distance of 4,000 feet and a vertical rise of 200 feet. This puts the outer edge of the conical surface at 350 feet above the airport elevation. Earlier, we exaggerated the vertical scale for more clarity. Now we'll take away that exaggeration to show you what it really looks like.
So again, that video is from actually the state of Washington. So they put it together. I want to say it's late 90s, so it's a bit grainy. But they really put it together to show their general aviation airports how important it is to protect the airspace. So, would we today put an airport right next to a mountain or a hill? Obviously not. But we find a lot of our airports next to things that are, rivers, landfills, sewage lagoons, factories, things like that. So really just kind of impressing upon them to protect their airspace, because once you give it away, you're not going to get it back. And we've had several instances in Grand Forks, actually, where the city has tried to build huge facilities right next to our airport, which would cause great difficulty for the university. And they'll be like, oh, you can just change your procedures. And because the city has not adopted the Grand Forks Airport's land use plan, because we're an authority. So we find ourselves kind of constantly fighting to keep our airspace intact, for a Chinese corn milling plant or a dog food plant, or, some industrial use that they think would be great next to the airport. So it's kind of a constant battle, no matter where you are. So, George, if you want to email me offline, I'm not entirely sure what you mean of perception stacks on autonomous ground service equipment providers. But feel free to drop me an email and I can maybe point you to some resources or tell you what I think. So, all right, Natalie, anything else?
That does it. Thanks again, Kim. Really great presentation. Thanks everybody for joining us here today. We will be posting this online. So if you have somebody you'd like to forward this to, somebody who should see it, we should be getting this up within the next couple of days here or so. And I hope we see you all at the upcoming conference. Thanks again.